Welcome to Opology. I'm your host, Christina McKelvey. Today we speak with Bridget from Expressive Arts Work. I enjoyed this conversation. This is where we explore the role that art has in health and how allowing space to express ourselves can impact our own healing in a positive way. Bridget also shares how she came to choose to be an expressive arts therapist and what is next for her on her journey. We also explore the impact social justice has within healing and how we can be advocates for change as healers. Stay tuned. Stories of hope, healing, and resilience. I'm your host, Christina McKelvey. Today we have Bridget with Expressive Arts. Welcome, Bridget. How are you doing?
Hi, great. How are you?
I'm good, thank you. And I said Expressive Arts. Is it Expressive Arts Work? Did I misspeak?
Yeah, you can add Expressive Arts Work. That's the website. Yep.
Okay.
Yeah.
So tell me a little bit about, your work through art. And, it sounds like, you were, or you are a therapist, but you use art as one of the mediums. Tell me a little bit more about that.
Absolutely. So that is correct. I have two different businesses, which we like to keep separate as therapists because the therapy stays over in the therapy lane and the coaching or the expressive arts facilitation is a totally different type of work, a little bit more short term, often in workshop format.
Mm-hmm.
And the way I came into it is I will just shout out Natalie Rogers, who was Carl Rogers' daughter. She's an amazing expressive arts psychotherapist who created the program I did for 2 years to get certified, which was called Person-Centered Expressive Arts. And anyone can do it. You can be a nurse, a coach, or anyone. And so what we would do is really utilize all modalities of art to create healing and look at ourselves and go deeper into that unconscious layer that often can't be expressed via words or cognitive therapy. So I came from a dance background, so that was part of what really drew me in. My master's degree at Santa Clara University, I loved all of my professors so much, and there wasn't anyone offering a creative modality. So that really felt lacking at that time for me. I couldn't do it right out of that master's degree because, you have to kind of get those hours and get licensed. But once
Oh, yes, I remember those times.
yes, right. Yeah. And so at the time, my partner, I was like, hey, I want to do this program. And it was like, not right now. We need to focus one thing at a time. So it was actually perfect timing. And yeah, it's really changed my life, honestly, integrating the arts. And there's a spirituality element for me as well, mindfulness, meditation, movement. It's so vast what you can do when you drop into that kind of healing. So.
And, from the therapy framework, I am familiar with Carl Rogers, person-centered therapy, meeting the client where they're at. And I'm curious, how Natalie Rogers was able to integrate person-centered artwork or art therapy.
Yeah, it's really, really a vital distinction. So one thing is I don't put the words simply art and therapy together because shout out to all my amazing art therapist friends and colleagues. That is the whole entire master's done through the lens of art. So I did a 2-year program. It was 450 hours, but we don't call ourselves art therapists because there is a certification to become an expressive arts psychotherapist, but I haven't done that. So just clarifying because I don't want folks to be like, well, and I understand it deeply. So my work is really about creating the environment for the art to illuminate what's happening for us. So I might simply ask a question of what's here today. And we may have a notebook. Often I'm really specific now about the kind of very heavy duty watercolor based notebook I love to use because I love to go across the middle of the notebook because we know how healing crossing our midline is with a lot of different type of psychotherapies.
Oh,
So the
wow.
expressive
Okay.
arts, yeah, utilizing writing, utilizing paint, we're crossing over that midline, and it can be very restorative. And there is just so much opportunity to get out of our head, to really meet ourselves right where we are. So I don't often say, how about we draw a dragon, a mountain, and a stream? I will say, what's coming up for you? Would you like to scribble? Can you invite some circles? What feels comfortable? I always seem to have a heart somewhere in my expressive arts pages, like in my art journal page. It's just like such that pattern of allowing that shape to come out of, I just keep saying yes. I just keep saying yes to whatever's happening. So that's how Natalie, that's a long answer to how Natalie took what her dad did and then offered it to us through deep meditation. She called it the creative connection. So you started with some meditation or movement. You sometimes moved into visual art. She often had instruments in the room, which I was so lucky to have a lot of the instruments she collected from around the world. And then we would share, like you would in a support group or a group psychotherapy session, though it's again, it's not therapy in that context, but it was incredibly healing to then share the work, and very vital. We would not say anything evaluative about what we saw. So if you were doing a piece of work, maybe I saw a thing that looked like a tree, but I might say, why don't you tell me about it? What do you notice? What was that like for you? What was that process like for you? So it's very in the moment, and it's not evaluative. It's like very just noticing, I see the green. Do you want to speak about your art? If you don't want to, that's okay.
Very present, very mindful.
Yeah, exactly.
So it sounds like she integrated a lot of mindfulness, being present, and acceptance, into creative expression.
Well, she was raised by Carl Rogers. So, and you drop in there and you're like, okay, when's the thing going to come out where she's like my dad? Because I've read almost all of her books. And no, it was really what we see. It was he was authentically him. I mean, that doesn't mean that I'm sure there were times he got frustrated or they had conflict, but authentic, positive regard, a real sense of knowing that we come to this life whole, and we're not trying to get at a thing or fix ourselves or change ourselves. We're really coming back home to ourselves, is what I hear in both Natalie and Carl's work and offering.
Coming back into ourselves. Tell me a little bit more about what that means.
I mean, for me, it's about not continuing to seek answers outside of ourselves. And I think psychotherapy, especially in these times when we see so much chaos in the world, it's really difficult to think about, for me personally, where my clients are going to go to get this healing. I'm doing air quotes. I think we have to just really learn to return to the present moment inside of ourselves and trust that we can get to a safe enough place inside of ourselves and learn and grow there, versus grasping for the next, it's coming to my mind, but God forbid, diet and or fad and or, I'm decidedly anti-diet. And so I just feel as though there's so much in wellness culture, as we all know, or I feel frustrated by it, where we're seeking this goal. And I have always been pretty resistant to that. And so this fits really well with me. The humanistic psychotherapy model has always been really my home and the way I feel. So I think as soon as I met Natalie, I got to meet her ages ago at a workshop, and I knew I was going to do the work because she embodied that sense of person-centered awareness.
So, 'cause, 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 ' You mentioned a bit ago about wellness culture, and as I was doing my research, I saw a article where you commented on white wellness culture.
Yeah, sure. Totally.
Yeah. Or white woman wellness culture, and like what that looks like. And
yeah. I mean, we know white women on a whole are really at the potential for change because we have held a lot of potential to affect the folks in our family. So when I think of white wellness culture, I think about what we're co-opting, even you and I, both as healers here, like where did we get this? Where did this come from? It came from collectivistic cultures. We know as a civilization, as a humanity, as humans, we live for eons, for thousands and thousands and thousands of years, I assume doing healing work, which came from indigenous folks, came from a culture that is not white culture. And so I've been in a deep dive. I wouldn't say it started exactly the summer of 2020 when George Floyd was murdered, but it deepened in that moment. I realized I had to really put my feet on the ground and focus my attention on undoing whiteness as much as I could day to day. And it's a never ending journey for all of us. We all are affected by that culture. So, I mean, essentially what I mean is immediacy. I mean, fix it culture. I mean, the way whiteness shows up in everything we do in capitalism and racialized capitalism. So yeah, we could talk the whole rest of the time about that, but in short, that's what I mean.
It's very true because I see, when I think of white wellness culture, I also think of white-centric, Eurocentric psychotherapy. And that was like, that's very much like the blank slate model, Freud, things like that. And as we unpack the appropriation that we've probably taken on as therapists unintentionally or intentionally, some of us, and how we can show up and be present for our clients in a culturally appropriate way. There is so much unlearning. And like you said, we could take up the whole time, but I'm curious how that could play into expressive arts works since, it is that connection.
Absolutely. One of the primary ways that I've been having the opportunity to get the expressive arts into the world is with my colleague, Ashley Butler. And she's a coach from Portland, Oregon. And we offer a class or a workshop called Moving Beyond the Fear of Making a Racialized Mistake. And so the way the expressive arts show up in that class specifically is to help folks regulate. So it's for white folks and also explore what's happening for them via image, via shape, color, line. It's primarily, we almost always utilize art journal type format, but we've music through, and then Ashley's trained in theater of the oppressed, and I have a theater background as well. So we do shapes, meaning we make movements in the Zoom boxes. This is all run on Zoom. And then we allow, so maybe we're utilizing a quote, I'll paraphrase from Resmaa Menakem, that white culture is the dominant culture inside of all of us. And I'm really, really paraphrasing here, but to talk about whiteness and embody it, and then use shape and color and line to represent what's happening inside of ourselves, then to go into a small group and look at it, and then to come back out in the larger group and notice the shifts, notice the struggle. So that's the thread of expressive arts through that workshop. And there's a lot of mindfulness and breathing and compassion practice. So that's one of the ways that it feels as though that has been the most successful way I've been able to bring expressive arts into the world. And I feel pretty excited about continuing that work. I mean, very excited. So did that answer your question? I mean, I think there's another subtle layer. I'll just say something I'm still learning about is where there is appropriation inside these practices. So I'm aware that is something Natalie wouldn't have exactly had an analysis about potentially. how these Eurotrick ways get into psychotherapy and into the coaching world. And I mean, she was a PhD psychologist, but we weren't putting the language around that as much back when she was alive. I mean, I'm sure there were folks that were doing it. I'm not saying that's not what, wasn't happening, but I'm still getting at how to separate that.
It's still a lot of unlearning or,
Yes.
Kind of unpacking, a lot of the different approaches, I'm sure.
Completely. You got it.
Okay. Well, it sounds amazing. It sounds very, like, I understand that it is separate from psychotherapy, the expressive arts. I work with children and I do use a lot of art therapy in my practice, and teach parents also to just be present and with the child as they're drawing or even playing. And instead of saying, "Oh, look at that tree," it's like, "Oh, I'm curious about what you did here," or, just that language, because it helps with that connection.
That's right. Yeah, because as a therapist with young children, that when they say, "I've drawn a tree, but I've actually drawn, I don't know, it could be a bush or it could be a lollipop," like you don't really know what's in my mind. And so to assume is really it's shutting me down and boxing me in and making me think you need to know, which of course we want to know. It's not wrong. Our brains are wired this way for very good reason. And to undo that, I think, can be incredibly powerful. It brings some slowness, in this culture where we're so go, go, go. And I love that. I love to know that you do that with parents and kids. That's exciting. Yeah.
And I have to remind myself too. I'm like, oh yeah, be present.
Of course, especially when someone draws something. I was in with a session with a client and they, they represented this thing. They drew a thing, which I like to say, "Oh, you're really, that looks a lot like what it looks like in the real world. I can see that you took a lot of time to have that be represented in the way you and I see it. It is phenomenal when an artist can do things like this. And for those of us, myself, who can't represent, I think it's really lovely when somebody meets us and just says, "Tell me about that green splotch there. What's happening in that space?" So we don't get in this evaluative place.
And, as like with ourselves, sometimes it's really good not to do that too, not to evaluate.
Exactly. Well, and the metaphor is always there, right? Like, I've had a client for many, many years who's an expressive arts client. Now I transitioned her from longtime therapy client to expressive arts because she's doing great, and she loves art. And she's like, "I didn't even look it up on the internet anymore." And I'm like, exactly. It's like this huge celebration that she can just sort of draw from the world and from her own heart and experience and mind and make that connection and allow the mess, allow it to go wrong, so to speak. Right. Yeah. And also in some ways I love to play around. I mean, one invitation I do give is like permanent marker and watercolor, because it is a pretty Buddhist idea, but it's like, what is impermanence? And then there are these things that we cannot change. Like there's so little we have control over. So the permanent mark may be representing the things we don't have control over, and the watercolor allowing that shift and that ease and that noticing, like it can go over that permanent ink and you'll still see that permanent ink, but you can kind of shift it and you can kind of shift the whole landscape or the way you greet it and meet it with a water-based product versus a permanent piece of, line.
The symbolism in the art can translate over to life very easily.
Exactly. Yeah, I hope so. That's what I feel.
How has it personally impacted you?
So enormously. I think you and I briefly chatted, and you'll see it on my website and certainly on my Instagram. I was married to a lovely man who I co-parent with, and I won't go into a ton of that, but we were in couples therapy. We were trying to make it work. We had a great parent partnership, but I knew something wasn't clicking. And I went into this session. It was 2018 in April, saying to myself, I really want to figure out what's happening with my body, sexuality, my desire. It's gone. Is it just parenthood? Like my kid's 9, come on, like I wasn't talking very nicely to myself. I was single focused. I mean, that's what I mean. I was like, this is going to happen now. And so I had a huge breakthrough just in a peer-to-peer session. And I realized that I had been queer my whole life. I mean, at that time, it's funny. I was like, oh my God, I'm gay. And then I was like, I'm a lesbian. And now I identify as queer. I don't dislike any of those other labels, but queer feels really aligned politically and sexuality wise. So, so I made some big choices, and luckily, amazingly, my family has come along. My kid really never batted an eye. They were just like, that totally makes sense. If you like to date women, then that, I get it. The marriage has to end. And
that's very understanding.
Yeah, he at the time, he is a kid in the queer space as well. He's a trans kiddo, and I think he just knew himself and saw himself in me. And my husband, as I lovingly call him, was raised by 2 women for a period of time. So there was a lot of queerness. Yeah. I mean, not everybody was like super on board the nanosecond it happened. Of course, it took time. So that's how it changed me. I am very clear to say, like, obviously that is a pretty profound and significant life change. I don't know what it's not that I'm saying that's going to happen for everybody. So yeah, I guess that's obvious. I don't know. I just like to sort of add that, it can shift subtle things as well. Just having an art practice. We know, for instance, Julia Cameron, who's been doing work, and I'm rereading The Artist Way, that book she wrote.
You're the second person to tell me to read, or not to, you didn't tell me to read it, but it has mentioned it in the last week.
You got to pick it up. Yeah,
I guess so.
It's a phenomenal body of work, and it's all about greeting each morning with the morning pages and really getting those words and thoughts out on the page. And I had done it, close to 30 years ago for the first time, and now I'm doing it again. And I'm seeing all the connections. It makes so much sense to me that the expressive arts they came very easily to me, I'll say, to be able to do that daily art practice, which Natalie Rogers really was pretty also committed to. That's the thing. That's the thing you need to do, is the daily art practice. So I feel as though that's the thing I'm constantly saying to all my clients, as we all do, like, journal. And it's like, well, what does that mean? And I realize we don't often say what that means. Julia Cameron is like, dump every thought on that page. It doesn't matter how insignificant, how much you judge it, how much you're afraid of it. Just put it out there. Nobody's going to come read that. And if you're nervous about that, I offer this practice that, of course, I didn't make up, where you obscure your journal. So you turn the page, you write over your own writing, you turn again, you write over your own writing. I have images at my website about it, because some people really are afraid to have their words be seen. And I get that. You could paint over them. Of course, you could rip the page out and tear it up.
Yeah. It's still there, but it's not, it keeps up. It's a sense of safety by doing something like that.
Yeah, exactly. That confidentiality even. And sometimes from ourselves. I mean, sometimes I get a little bit tired of reading my to-do list, which, in the recent years has really shifted. I've been able to really commit to daily practices that enliven me. But for decades, I swear I wrote it, every 6 months, like, journal more, meditate more, move your body more. It's like, okay. So I feel as though maybe it's something about middle age, so to speak. It's kind of allowed me that space to have those practices be really pretty vital.
And the to-do list to, journal more, meditate more, it's almost evaluative in a way, there's that judgment, like, oh, I didn't get to it today.
Exactly. Which is so counter to the
Mm-hmm.
hope of the practice. Yeah. Yeah.
But it sounds like, so 20, you said 2018 was when you came out as
Right.
queer, 2019, 2018.
18. Yes.
And then you mentioned 2020 was when you were trying to, like, was when you were reevaluating, your whiteness and during the George Floyd. So it sounds like there was like a lot of shift that was happening for you the last few years.
For sure. I think I'm not alone in that. Obviously, I think we
Mm-hmm.
saw, I guess I mean, and others, I didn't make this up, obviously, but the uprising of 2020, which we know has been coming. I
Yeah.
think there's so much possibility in the healing world. And I even have stopped using the word well. This is going to sound a little maybe far out, but I'm really trying to bring in ease, sort of moments of ease, because there are so many people who are not well and will never be well, and who even we have 2020 and then we have the pandemic, and
Mm-hmm.
experience of grief and loss that I think collectively we've not really looked at. So, indeed, over the last 3 years, I've had a huge privilege to be able to slow down and really evaluate what I want to be doing with my life. And a big part of that is out there on all of my websites, particularly the expressive arts side, has to do with liberatory type practices and mutual aid, and really sitting in collective with folks who come from all various backgrounds, for sure, including global majority folks or Black, Indigenous, people of color, and really centering those voices and really seeing where I do fit in this work. And I mean, there's been some deep questioning around whether or not I want to stay doing this work, but for now I'm here, and I'm really committed to doing it with a lens of awareness, and pretty consistently bringing that in, even in my therapy work as well. Not to direct folks to that anti-oppressive, anti-racist lens, but that's where I sit. So if you don't have some experience or curiosity or interest in that work, then we probably aren't going to be a fit long term.
Yeah. And I think you can't, I don't think you can separate therapy or healing from social justice. Like you have to, it's intertwined.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, exactly. One of my teachers who I've just really benefited so much from says, love and justice are not two. So without one, we can't have the other. And if loving ourselves isn't healing, then I don't know what is. So it totally makes sense to me. I couldn't agree more. It's fun to unpack things like this with somebody who's really aware. I think it's been, I don't know, I can't speak for all therapists, but it's been curious to me sort of who's been on this journey with me and who I'm not as in touch with anymore. I guess I'm not trying to say, I don't know where everyone is. We can't know everybody's hearts and everybody's work, but it's really, I'm really excited to know more about your commitment to these practices and this way of seeing things.
I feel like it's a daily practice. I grew up in Hawaii, and that was an experience in of it itself, because, economically and politically, haoles is what we called white people were the majority, but in everyday life, we were the minority. And there was just like, how I navigated that. And I feel really grateful for being, around a diverse group of individuals. I went to public school, and, the indigenous practices, there's like a revival happening in Hawaii now, which is great. And I live in Arizona, which is similar, with the Hopi and the Navajo and Yavapai tribes, just like that indigenous practice revival that is needed, because we're on their land.
Absolutely. That's right.
Yeah. And
that's so great to hear about, for sure.
And that's kind of where, so I've had that foundation, but at the same time, I grew up in a very evangelical, white Christian, family with like subsets of like that Midwest, Southern, just there
Yeah.
was a lot more. There's a lot more to it. And so as I'm on this journey, similar, there's things I'm learning about myself. And so it's just very
Yeah.
interesting. So I love connecting with others as well. Because I think there's just like this awakening happening
Yes.
in the
Yes. Yes.
world.
Yes.
And so
That's right. Oh, so rich. So many connections. So
Mm-hmm.
rich. Yeah, I
shared a lot.
love it though, because I mean, this is how we get to know each other, right? And you're not doing it. Yeah, I mean, interviewer, interviewee, it's
Mm-hmm.
I feel like we need more circles, especially that background of growing up in Hawaii must have really influenced you. And I love those lands, and I've made at least, I haven't had the funds to go, but I have made that tentative, at least for me, having not grown up there, to not go back right now, because I have been really watching the, the potential. I mean, I wish that the US would give folks, the Hawaiians, back their land, right? I mean, that is not, anyway, that might be far afield, but I mean, I know there's many, many folks, and I'm sure people directly and personally who may feel that way as well. But it's not mine to say, but I'm gonna steer clear of going back for this instant anyway.
Yeah. Just I'm curious to see what happens, with in the future, with this more awareness. I'm curious, if you're able to share maybe with your personal life or some of your clients or other colleagues, how working through art has increased that awareness and maybe sense of change. I know you shared a little bit, about your journey again, starting 2018, but there's more.
Well, yeah, it doesn't end, I think when I was coming out, I thought, oh, I've unlocked everything. Everything's in place. This is it. This was the thing, and come to find out, there's never one thing.
Nope. That's layered.
Yeah. There's never a sort of kind of answer, I don't think that, I've studied Buddhism a lot, and it's like, I'm going to definitely go around quite a few more times, I believe. So, it's like really that on the ground liberation is what I'm committed to. Another thing that happened, I haven't said this anywhere completely publicly, but I'm starting to think more and more into it, because it feels like a real something that's going to be a practice, I think, for as long as I need it to be. But I stopped drinking alcohol a year ago, and I think it must be connected on some level. It was always in the back of my mind. And I think the expressive arts, if you're moving, you're meditating, I consider swimming. I swim in the San Francisco Bay to be a commitment to my overall health and moving my body. There have been ways that I can't exactly point them to the expressive arts, but there's something about committing to putting myself in front of that page and seeing what comes back that makes the path more clear. And it's like what a lot of well-meaning health medical professionals will say, they don't say it in this way, but I would say move your body, nourish yourself with foods you love. Also, I like to throw in, don't resist or cut off things. Like, I had a corn dog yesterday, and I have to tell you, I had missed that. I me for a minute. So it's allowed me
to evaluate yourself.
Exactly. It's just allowed me to be flexible and look at what works for me, what doesn't work, and I can put that down. And I'm for sure I have some neurospicy ADHD type of a situation going on. And I think the arts and doing these expressive arts practices have allowed me to embrace that part of me versus feel that it's weird or too much or too silly or eccentric. So I worry I'm making it sound like a panacea, but trust me, I have my day. I have days of not wanting to engage and, just stay in bed, but they're pretty few and far between.
And those are okay too. It sounds like expressive arts has allowed you and your clients to come to this place of acceptance, being present, being in the moment, not being evaluative, like you mentioned, and just being, which, yes, it's very much a mindful Buddhist perspective, which there's a lot of truth in too. I lean that way as well. And, it just sounds like the expressive arts has really enabled that to happen for you. And I definitely see that connection with person-centered Carl Rogers, why his daughter Natalie went that way as well. Just like saying yes. Yeah.
Yeah, some big yeses. The more creativity we can infuse into the world, the better off we will all be.
What would that look like?
Well, I'll tell you, I won't get into all the names, but this blog I'm going to write this week really tracks a lot of this. And as you're speaking and kind of continuing to call in Carl and Natalie, I'm thinking about all the queer collective folks I know now. And I was speaking to this artist, and she was saying she is visioning creative circles just sprouting up everywhere and sort of becoming a mutual, this is my language, but I see sort of a mutuality between us, like how you and I met. I saw your post, reached out, you're in Arizona, I'm in California. You grew up in Hawaii, I grew up in Tennessee. Who do we know that could, like, on Instagram, wherever, I don't care, email, phone, like text, like, let's create care networks, let's create artist networks. And then I think those become care networks. So, I dream big. I believe in it. I've seen it. I've seen it work. I mean, it happens. It's out there. It's already been there. And I think primarily white culture and sometimes that evangelical culture, unfortunately, can really up folks, or the Christian, that stronghold of like, this is the place we get the care. Well, when those of us who are queer and don't feel safe in those spaces and or are very pushed out of those spaces, don't have a place to gather, we have to create it. Nobody's creating that for us. So, that's really what I hope to create with expressive arts work. In the beginning, I pretty much said I didn't actually want to take money for it unless I needed it, because I'm very committed to mutual aid and offsetting close to 10% of my annual income to folks who are bodies of culture and marginalized folks in need, essentially, in direct funding. So I know I'm ending on a big manifesto of sorts, but that's how I see it. I see lots of interwoven, interconnected folks doing art and then sharing resources.
Like you said, those care networks. Yeah. It's that sense of community, which has been a theme in almost every podcast I've recorded. Every podcast I've recorded, almost, there's been that underlying theme sometimes, and sometimes it's not underlined, it's just right there, of having that sense of community and belonging.
Yeah. Well, I mean, I think that unfortunately where we've gotten to, there is a lot of divisiveness, and we know we have to get back to that collective care or that community care in order to heal. The individual work is important. I think there's nothing wrong with sitting in therapy with an individual therapist or a healer or coach, et cetera. But if you aren't walking out of that Zoom room or door and then also engaging in community, even if it's one person or two people, I always say to my clients, if they're feeling lonely, like, who's that one that feels the least difficult to reach out to? Maybe you haven't talked to them in 6 months or 6 years, but you can send a text, you can start small and just see who's out there. So yay, I couldn't agree more. I'm glad to hear that is what you're seeing, which doesn't surprise me based on everything you're sharing as well.
I maintain a blog about self-care, and I'm all about self-care. I do talks and trainings on self-care. I've been on podcasts about self-care. However, I'm in this process of really stressing that self-care is not necessarily individual, kind of like what you're saying. It is collective. You have to have, it is political as well, and be able to have those resources and that support and that community in order to be able to have the time to take care of yourself. And so, it's in the consciousness, I believe.
I think so, for sure. I
Mm-hmm.
think we see with how resources are so, the perception of them being limited
Mm-hmm.
is so clear. And our earth is telling us we have to slow down and we have to maybe really think about staying local. And I love everything you're saying. I think it is such that catchphrase self-care, but then how are we sharing what we're doing, and also perhaps having accountability partners. Like I've been going through a pretty
Mm.
intense period of grief the last several weeks, and my folks are reaching out, my people are reaching out to me, and it it's so vital. Like I don't, we aren't made to be in these little silo nuclear family houses. Like it's just not how we were for the most of our existence on this little tiny dot. We weren't doing it that way, right? So it feels simplistic, and sometimes I still have this little like, well, but it's like, no, that's really true. We used to live in like bands of 100 folks, so like let's figure out who those people are and hold on.
Our networks.
Yeah.
I think that's a sign that we are running close to
Yes.
time.
Yeah.
I like to
Hydrate. Time to rest.
eat some lunch.
Yes.
I like to close every podcast with one question, and that is, what brings you hope?
Okay, this is gonna be cheesy. I don't think you knew this, but it's my middle name, quite literally.
Oh, you mean your middle name is Hope?
Yeah. Bridget Hope Bertrand. Yeah. So when I was yeah, I don't know why I'm sharing this, but when I was first becoming a therapist, I worked on the crisis hotline and I named myself Hope. So if for some reason anybody out there is listening and they got a hope on a crisis hotline, I just think what brings me hope is connecting like this. I mean, I've had chills a couple times a day. I know you and I will be in touch.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, community, collective bring me hope. And the fact that we can really commit to that and not take our eye off of that goal, that brings me a lot of hope that we're all still doing this kind of connecting and community building. So
Yeah. Community, connection. And you mentioned earlier that creative connection.
for sure, I think everybody's an artist. I really believe that. So even my folks who aren't doing art right now, they know, I'll probably be asking in the next couple of sessions, like, why don't we just do a scribble? We all have that capacity. So never tell yourself you're not an artist, because I really believe we all are.
Hmm. And where can individuals find you?
Yeah, they can look at my website, which is expressivearts.work. So it's a little funny ending situation there. I saw that back in the day when I created the website in 2017, and I was like, oh, fun. It's actually
Oh,
about job opportunity type things, which is hilarious. I'm like, maybe that's a sign one day I'll like be gathering lots of artists to put their work there, which I would love. And then it's the same Instagram, expressive_arts_work. But just go to the website. I think you'll find all the places.
well, I really appreciate you being here. I also enjoyed our conversation. Like, again, I am very humanistic, person-centered, and it's just amazing to see the connections, of, art therapy and expressive arts, and, what type of healing that can do for somebody.
Yeah, I think it does really connect to your point about sharing how we care for ourselves. We could say we can do that every day at home on our own, in addition to seeking out that facilitator, coach, healer,
Mm-hmm.
and therapist. However, whomever you seek out, you also have to do a little each day. That's my hope for people, that they commit to themselves just a little bit more day after day, because it's not a one and done kind of situation.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Well, Bridget, thank you so much for being here. And, I look forward to seeing what you're doing in the future, what you build. and I'm going to continue to read your Substack newsletter as well.
Right, Substack. I forgot to shout that out. Thanks for highlighting that.
Of course.
I am really enjoying Substack as a platform. It's pretty fun.
Stay tuned for more information about how to support the podcast, and we'll be right back. Thank you for listening to Hopology. If you enjoyed today's show, please leave us a review. To learn more about us or listen to past episodes, you can find us on all your podcast streaming stations. If you are interested in being a guest, or if you have any feedback, please email us at hopologypodcast@gmail.com. You can also support our show by clicking on the link in our show notes. Please also follow our Instagram page, Hopology Podcast, and visit our website, www.hopologypodcast.com.